contribute to the volume. I'm in a position both of closing and also trying to take up the cudgels put down by Tedros of the Radical Manifesto, in the sense of a problematic. That is to say, my article is about the birth of a new movement in South Africa, in Durban, a movement of Shackdwellers, whose slogan is talk to us, not about us. And now I'm in a situation where I'm talking to you about them. So that is indeed a kind of problematic. And I haven't really thought about a meta-theoretical way to think about some of the issues that my article brings up. And I suppose I'll do that in a more kind of polemical sense, that the article in a certain way is a critique of intellectuals, of the standpoint of the intellectual, of what theory is. That's implicit in the movement of the Shackdwellers. Explicit in the Shackdwellers movement is a critique of policy. Right? In other words, of non-government organizations and government organizations that talk about Shackdwellers and about shanty towns and so forth. And you have to realize that we're talking about probably nearly 1 million people in South Africa who are living in urban areas and who, under the guise of the World Cup, are now potentially going to be cleared out. In other words, when a simple thing as drawing for the World Cup happened last week in Durban, in other words, what group you're going to be in and so forth, they removed, it happened in Durban, they removed all the street kids. They were just shipped out of Durban. They didn't exist on the streets of Durban. So you can imagine the kind of clean-up campaign that's going to be when the World Cup occurs in 2010. It's a critique of policy. A critique of policy in the sense that there must be great jubilation if you hear that the Gates Foundation has given $10 million to Shackdwellers International. This happened last week. And this is a marvelous thing. Shackdwellers International claims to be an organization that represents Shackdwellers both in South Africa and elsewhere. However, Shackdwellers International does not might represent Shackdwellers, but it doesn't actually talk to Shackdwellers. So again, we have an enormous amount of money pumped in to an NGO, who is now going to be using that money, talking to other NGOs about what to do for Shackdwellers, right? And one of the things, and again, it's a critique of politics. That is to say, it's a critique of the idea that yes, we can build houses in post-apartheid South Africa. Many houses have been built. And what kind of houses are they, and also where are they? In other words, to live in a shack might sound like it's the worst thing in the world, but in fact, it's better to live in a shack in an urban area than to live in a house, what they call a house, a small 10 by 10 structure, out in the peri-rural areas where there's really no opportunities at all. To talk to the Shackdwellers, therefore, means talking with them about what can be done. And part of their critique of Shackdweller International and the government is that they really want to stay in towns, right? And they want to they want to improve the shacks. They want electricity, right? They want toilets. They want most basic things, but they want to be involved in discussions about these things. So they say, talk to us. Come to the Shackdweller settlements and talk to us. We don't want to go and Spusa Cody is the president of Abahlali, based on the Shackdwellers movement in Durban, says for many years, in other words from 1995 until 2005, he was involved with ANC structures, with local government structures, with NGOs and so forth, attempting to improve the lot of people in his Shackdweller community, which is on Kennedy Road. But he said nothing happened. And he said he got sick and tired of going and sitting on comfortable chairs, talking to politicians and all the promises that were given out, and nothing happened. Until finally they decided the land that was promised to them, which was adjacent to the shack settlement, was being bulldozed, and they realized, in fact, the promises had been broken. The promised land, in other words, was not forthcoming, and they demonstrated and took over and barricaded streets and so forth, and that was the birth of the movement, and it gained an enormous amount of publicity. However, it puts them outside, in other words, of civil society. They now became criminalized because whereas before they were, shack dwellers were supposed to be part of a system of representation, now they were making demands, and by making these demands, they were being seen as criminals. They were accused of being a third force. Now, any of you who know South African history of KwaZulu-Natal might remember the third force was, in fact, the apartheid, underground apartheid-funded forces during the struggles of the late 80s and early 90s, especially between ANC and the Zulu Inkatha movement. So to be called someone who's part of a third force is basically to be called a counter-revolutionary, right? And it's very, very dangerous, and it hasn't made their situation particularly tenable. But on the other hand, there is in this movement not simply the want to get better housing, but also a critique, in other words, of post-apartheid conceptions of democracy. Right? Talk to us means come to the meetings where we discuss. Talk to us means talk to those who are basically considered, in that most Fanonian sense, the kind of dregs, right? The poorest of the poor. When Sbusa Cody was invited to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, he did talk about class. He talked about class in the most concrete way. He talked to some of the intellectuals who, in fact, were supporting at that time the movement. And he said to Faisal Khan, who is a sociologist who in fact has been fired from the University of KwaZulu-Natal for supporting the movement, because in fact, interestingly, there are shacks on the land of the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So when you start supporting shack dwellers, you might actually come to physical contact with the bosses, your own bosses at the university, right? So in other words, it becomes quite dangerous. It's not, you can't, if you really want to support shack dwellers, you don't only cross ANC leaders and local government leaders, but also your own supervisors and bosses and so forth. Well, anyway, there was a moment when Sbusa Cody was celebrated by the left. That is to say, the left, who are kind of part of the critique of the ANC, but still within civil society. That is to say, a left who think that, yes, the shack dwellers are important, but they should be part of our program. That kind of left, right? Now, Cody wants autonomy. He doesn't want to be part of anybody's, he doesn't think a shack dweller should be part of anybody's program. He doesn't think in those kinds of terms. Nevertheless, he was invited to speak at the university, and he said immediately that Faisal Khan talks about the working class, but how many taps does he have? Now, to me, I read this, and I immediately thought of how many taps I had. And it gives you a kind of concreteness of what they're fighting for. In other words, they have one tap. They have 7 taps for 5,000 people in Kennedy Road, right? But we might consider how many taps we have in our houses. We might have 7 taps. It was for me, it was very concrete, and it really gave me a different